Hello everyone. Today, I'm back to continue sharing the story of Tieu, a single mother living a simple life, yet carrying within her many quiet, unspoken emotions. It is a journey of days that pass slowly, of loss of endurance, and of learning how to stand firm again, how to trust in life once more through very small things. I hope that through the story, you may find a part of yourself somewhere, in the fragility, and in those very gentle rays of hope that are just enough to keep moving forward. Tieu learns to breathe again, slowly, not as a natural reflex, but as something she must consciously remind herself to do. One moment at a time, each inhale, each exhale, happens with hesitation, as if she is carefully feeling her way back to life. After a stretch of time, when even existing felt unbearably heavy, she tells herself that the air is still here, that her chest can still rise and fall, that this body, though exhausted and fractured, has not completely let go. After those long days of utter depletion, days when she believed she no longer had the strength to stand, when she felt that just one more gentle gust of wind could be enough to make everything collapse, breathing in and breathing out becomes a quiet effort. No one sees it. No one knows that every single breath carries an immense amount of struggle, slow but necessary. Those breaths are the way Tieu practices returning to herself, practices staying inside her body and her feelings. After once wanting to disappear along with the pain of losing her child is still there. Not loud, not displayed, not screaming or forcing her into tears every day. It remains in another form, deep, cold, and smoldering, resting inside her chest, like a wound that has not yet closed, covered only by the thin skin of endurance. Whenever a memory is accidentally touched, the pain flares up softly, not enough to knock her down, but enough to make her fall silent for a few seconds. That persistent ache reminds her that some losses never truly disappear, that they cannot be erased by time or comfort. They only change their shape, quietly staying with the one who carries them. And Tieu understands that the only thing she can do is not to forget, but to learn how to carry that pain a little lighter with each passing day, so that she can continue walking along the long road of life that still lies ahead. But thanks to little Ivy, that small yet powerful ray of light, Tieu gradually finds her way back to the rhythm of life she had lost, not through a clear recovery or a dramatic turning point, but through changes that are very slow, very quiet, unfolding bit by bit in days that seem almost identical, like someone who has just stepped out of a long storm. She is still trembling, still carrying fatigue and confusion, yet she has begun to turn her face toward the light, even if that light is still far away and not yet clearly shaped. The child's presence does not drive away the sadness, does not erase the painful memories, nor does it make her heart suddenly feel lighter. But Ivy is there, with her vivid, unguarded innocence, quietly placing in Tieu's heart a reason to keep waking up each day, a reason that does not need to be named, simply the feeling that, if she were to fall, there would be a bewildered gaze, a tiny hand that would not understand what had happened. And so she gathers back the pulses of life that once seemed to have slipped through her fingers, holding on to them with a fragile patience that is nonetheless enduring. Each time she hears the child's clear, ringing laughter that rises so naturally, without a trace of worry or self-protection, something inside Tieu softens, a feeling so faint, so delicate, arriving and passing like a brief breeze, yet enough for her to sense the change. It is as if someone is gently touching the still aching wound within her, not tearing it open, not making it disappear, only resting a hand lightly upon it, just enough to make the pain a little less sharp. And in that brief moment, Tieu understands that, amid losses too deep to name, there are still small, ordinary moments, quietly keeping her anchored to life, not through force, but by a gentle thread that has never truly broken. From that point on, Tieu understands that she cannot remain in the darkness forever, cannot keep standing still in the heavy silence of days gone by, where every emotion seems compressed to the point of suffocation. That darkness was once her only shelter, the place she retreated to so she would not completely collapse, so she would not have to face the outside world, while she was still too fragile. But after staying there for too long, she gradually realizes that it is no longer just a way of avoiding pain, but a way of separating herself from the life that is quietly continuing all around her. That realization comes very softly. It does not arrive like a wake-up call, nor does it come with tears or decisive resolutions. It appears as a silent thought taking shape within her, slipping into the stillest moments, when she sits alone and understands that if she continues to stay there, she will slowly lose what remains of herself. Not only joy, but the ability to feel, the ability to connect with life, and even the right to continue existing as a whole human being. As her emotions gradually settle, as the inner chaos stops colliding so violently, and leaves behind only a dull fatigue and a quiet sorrow, Tieu returns to work, not with sudden strength, but with slow steps, careful yet steadier than before. Like someone relearning how to stand firmly on her own feet. Each working day becomes a small milestone, marking that she is still present, still participating in the flow of life. She treats busyness as a way to find inner peace, not to fill the pain, but to give herself a familiar rhythm to hold on to. Work anchors her to everyday life, so that her days do not pass only in waiting or silent endurance. Each task, each occupied moment, becomes part of a quiet process of rearranging her emotions, allowing pain to have its place, without letting it consume everything. And within that steady rhythm, Tieu continues to live, not rushing to forget what has been lost, but learning to carry it with her as she moves forward. Slowly, yet no longer standing still. One evening, when the space had settled into stillness after a long day, Tieu gently asked Hai's mother for permission to return to her old house. She spoke slowly, her voice much softer, as if raising it even a little might disturb the fragile quiet that filled the room. There was no haste in her words, nor any loud or resolute determination, just a very gentle request, small enough to reveal the hesitation that still lingered in her heart. Even Tieu herself could feel that she was carefully feeling her way through each emotion, as cautious as someone afraid of hurting herself, before stepping out of the protective embrace that had become familiar and safe. Throughout the recent stretch of time, she said that she needed to learn how to rely on herself again, not because she no longer needed care or concern, but because the time had come for her to try to stand steady on the very legs that had trembled for so long, under the weight of fear and loss. She needed to return to the place that held the most memories, where every small corner evoked what had been, so that she would no longer keep avoiding or hiding from what had happened in her life. She understood that this return would not be easy, that memory would not soften, simply because of this act of courage. But Tieu still needed to face those memories, in order to truly move forward, not to reopen the pain or wound herself once more, but to accept that what has been lost will always remain an inseparable part of her life. And only by daring to look straight at it, without avoidance, without denial, could she continue on, no longer carrying the quiet fear that weighed down every step of her way. The mother looked at her for a long time, her gaze resting on a face that had been shaped by so many changes, filled with worry and love, as if she were trying to read everything Tieu had not put into words. In that look was the hesitation of a mother afraid her child might be hurt again, but also a quiet understanding that the time had come for her to walk her own path. The silence lingered. No one spoke, only emotions slowly flowing between the two of them. Then the mother gave a slight nod, a very gentle nod, without advice or restraint, yet carrying trust, compassion, and a silent love placed behind her daughter's back. That decision felt like a great weight lifting from Tieu's heart. She could clearly feel her chest grow lighter, as if she were finally able, not because every worry had disappeared, but because she knew she had just been given permission to choose to move forward in her own way, without carrying guilt or fear with her. That quiet consent became an invisible support, helping Tieu feel steadier as she faced the days ahead, days when she would have to stand up on her own, yet no longer with the same sense of loneliness as before. One sun-filled midday, the overhead light poured down onto the familiar road, and Tieu returned to her small house, her steps slowing even before she reached the gate. The house was still there, little changed from what she remembered, as if time had passed very gently, and only she herself carried the heavy changes within. She paused for a moment, letting the sunlight rest on her shoulders, letting the midday heat sink into her skin, as a way of reminding herself that she was truly coming home. The familiar space made her chest tighten, a feeling both tender and unsettling spreading quickly. Everything here bore the traces of earlier days. Every wall, every corner, seemed to still hold the breath of the past. The warmth made her want to stay, to lean into it. Yet that very familiarity also made the air feel slightly suffocating, as if memory were quietly closing its arms around her. Tieu breathed in slowly, standing still inside her own home, clearly sensing the gentle pull between peace and heaviness, coexisting within the same moment. In the days that followed, Tieu returned to a simple rhythm of life, neither rushing nor placing any grand expectations upon herself. Each day was received with the necessary slowness, like someone who has just stepped out of a long, unsteady stretch, and is learning again how to live with the ordinary. She began with preparing breakfast, standing in the familiar kitchen, listening to the small sounds echoing in the quiet space. Each movement unfolded in a steady rhythm, without much thought, just enough to give the morning its own pace. After that, she reviewed her work, sorted through tasks that had once been left unfinished, not forcing herself to be fast or exceptional, simply returning to the responsibilities of daily life. And in that process, Tieu resumed the small, everyday things that had been neglected during the days when her heart felt too heavy. Things that seemed so simple, yet each time they were completed, they brought back a familiar sense of existing. It was precisely these small acts, repeated quietly day after day, that were gently drawing her closer again to the rhythm of life she once thought she had lost. The small garden behind the house became her refuge, a quiet space tucked away behind the familiar home, where Tieu would go whenever her heart needed stillness. There, she did not have to try to appear okay, did not need to organize her thoughts or hide her emotions. There were only silent rows of plants, patches of earth yet to be tended, and an atmosphere slow enough for her to allow herself to breathe a little deeper. The garden asked nothing, expected nothing, simply existed as a place where she could temporarily set down the burdens in her heart. The soil felt soft beneath her fingertips, a coolness spreading gently as she bent down to touch the familiar ground. Tiny grains of earth slipped through her fingers, clinging to her skin as a very real sign of connection with life. The familiar scent of soil softened her spirit, a simple, unadorned fragrance, yet one that carried an indescribable sense of safety. In that moment, as her hands touched the earth, Tieu felt the rhythm of life returning, not loudly, not in haste, but slowly and steadily, enough for her heart to settle and remain at peace for a little while longer. Ivy ran all around the garden with the little puppy, her tiny feet darting along the familiar dirt paths, sometimes stumbling lightly and then breaking into laughter, circling the garden beds still fragrant with fresh soil. Her clear, ringing laughter echoed again and again, light and cool like a breeze passing through a peaceful afternoon, slipping into every corner of the garden, and making the once quiet space feel suddenly more alive. The child asked innocent questions, questions that did not need complete answers, only the natural curiosity of a growing child. They rose up unexpectedly, sometimes naive, sometimes causing adults to pause, yet always carrying a genuine innocence. And then, before she even realized it, Tieu smiled, a gentle curve at the corner of her lips, without effort, without caution, emerging naturally in that ordinary moment, as if her heart had just been touched by a small joy she had not felt in a very long time. And no one said it out loud. No confirmation or naming of emotions was needed, yet both of them could feel it clearly, in the pauses that followed one another, in the simple routines unfolding each day. The small house was gradually being filled with a warm light, a light that did not come from any radiant moment, but from steady presence, from soft laughter rising and fading, from the feeling of being together without effort, not dazzling, not brilliant or overwhelming, just as resilient as a young sprout pushing through soft soil, quietly pressing aside heavy layers of earth to rise, without noise, yet impossible to stop. That warmth grew little by little in the most natural way, slipping into every corner of the house, every breath, until the small home was no longer merely a place of shelter, but slowly became a living space, where hope is nurtured gently, and peace begins to take root. From things that are very soft, very real. The door opened, a familiar sound echoing softly through the space as it settled into quiet. Hai stepped inside at an unhurried pace, a simple bag in his hand and a warm smile on his lips. A smile without show, just enough to soften the atmosphere of the house a little more. His presence felt natural, as if he had always belonged to the rhythm of this place, needing no long greetings, a single glance already enough. He brought milk for Ivy, setting it down with an easy, practiced motion, like a habit formed from genuine care. Then he handed fruit to Tieu. Simple things unadorned, chosen with quiet thoughtfulness. These small gestures needed no words, yet carried a clear tenderness, naturally warming the moment, as if affection sometimes only needs to be shown through very small acts, offered at the right time, and in just the right measure. Ivy rushed into Hai's arms, her small feet moving quickly with eager excitement, throwing her arms around him with all the innocence and trust of a child. His embrace closed naturally, just right, warm, and steady, as if that moment had been familiar for a very long time. Ivy's laughter rang through the garden, clear and carefree, spreading across the quiet air, making everything around them seem to slow down and listen. Tieu stood watching, not stepping closer, only quietly following the scene with eyes that softened without her noticing. She saw the bond present in that ordinary moment, needing no explanation, no display of any kind. For the first time in a long while, she smiled from the depths of her heart. A smile without effort, without caution, arriving as naturally as breath itself. In that instant, her heart stirred gently, not because of any grand joy, but because a feeling of warmth and safety was quietly spreading, as if she had just realized that she still had the capacity to receive the gentle things that life offers. Hoai rolled up his sleeves, the gesture familiar and natural, as if he had never been an outsider in this space. He worked with them in the garden, gathering dry branches, turning over small patches of soil, planting with a care that did not need to be shown. No one assigned tasks. No one urged anyone on. Everything unfolded slowly and in harmony, like quiet breaths blending into one another. Amid those simple movements, a sense of familiarity quietly took shape, needing no words to confirm it. Time seemed to slow, the moments passing without their usual urgency. Sunlight settled gently on these peaceful scenes, catching in their hair, on soil-streaked hands, on fleeting smiles that lingered long in the heart. The space filled with a tender stillness, enough to let one forget the worries that still existed. Enough to feel that simply being together like this was already a rare kind of blessing. A patch of bare ground was mentioned, just a small, overlooked space in the familiar garden, quietly lying among areas of green that had already grown. Its presence was named very softly, like a passing thought, carrying neither certainty nor haste. The idea of a new flower garden took shape. Through the most ordinary words, the idea felt light, without pressure, simply opening up the possibility that the empty patch of earth could take on a different form in the future. Inside Tieu, a tiny seed of hope began to sprout. The feeling came gently, not clear enough to be called joy, but warm enough for her to recognize a change. It was like a subtle movement within, when her heart suddenly allowed itself to think about tomorrow with less caution than before. That seed was still fragile, in no hurry to grow, quietly existing as it was, a delicate yet real sign that after everything she had been through, Tieu could still wait and still believe, even if it all began with something very small. After a long day, when the fatigue slowly settled, the three of them cooked together in the familiar small kitchen. No one was in a hurry. Every movement unfolded gently, as if simply being together was enough to bring a day filled with emotions to a close. The most ordinary tasks, washing vegetables, setting a pot on the stove, arranging a few simple dishes, suddenly carried a warmth that was hard to name, like a rhythm of life gradually returning to its rightful place. Ivy's clear laughter rang out, woven between innocent remarks and little playful antics. Hoai's warm, steady voice responded, slow and composed, just enough to keep the atmosphere soft and calm. And the small kitchen glowed under yellow light, a gentle brightness resting on each face, blurring the remaining edges of fatigue. In that moment, everything felt so simple it seemed almost touchable. An ordinary evening, yet complete in the quietest, most genuine way. When Ivy was fast asleep, her steady breathing sounding softly in the quiet room, Tieu stood beside Hoai on the porch, where the night had settled gently, and the evening breeze carried a cool touch after a long day. They stood next to each other, needing few words, quietly sharing a rare moment of stillness. After the noise of the day had faded away, she softly spoke a word of thanks, her voice low and unhurried, as if afraid of disturbing that fragile moment. A thank you for today, for the simple things that were enough to warm her heart, and for all the days before, the days he had been there quietly, without promises, without demands, only through a patient and steady presence. The words were not many, yet they held so much that Tieu had kept within her for a long time, only now calm enough to speak gently aloud. Hoai held her slowly, gently, his arms closing with care, as if he fully understood the fragility present in that moment. There was no haste, no tightening of his grip, just an embrace close enough to pass along warmth, light enough that Tieu did not feel held back. His breathing was steady, calm like a quiet anchor, reaching her softly in the still air of the porch. In that moment, Tieu allowed herself to lean on someone, not out of weakness or surrender, but from a trust that had only just begun to take shape. After a long period of closing herself off, she let her body relax, letting the defenses she had always held tightly within loosen, little by little. For the first time in a long while, she did not brace herself to stand firm, did not remind herself to be strong any longer, but simply rested in that embrace. Feeling that, she no longer had to face everything on her own. The next morning, Hoai returned with hot coffee and milk for Ivy, the gentle scent of coffee spreading through the cool early air. He stepped inside with a familiar ease, unhurried, like a natural part of the small house. The warm cup in his hand, steam rising softly, was enough to ease the quiet of a new morning just beginning. The house seemed to brighten, not because of the sunlight on the porch, but because of the warmth carried by simple things. Footsteps, the smell of coffee, that calm, unassuming presence, slipped into every corner, making the morning feel lighter. In that moment, the house felt as though it had been gently awakened, not by loud sounds, but by a softness so subtle, it was enough to soften the heart. They went out together, their steps slow and side by side along familiar roads, with no destination set, simply letting time pass more gently than usual. They laughed together, their laughter rising naturally amid the most ordinary conversations, without strain, without caution, as if after a long stretch of silence, each of them was learning again how to relax. Then they shared lunch, sitting together in a peaceful pause, letting simple things fill a midday that drifted by slowly. In that moment, Tieu realized that happiness sometimes does not need to be clear or radiant. It can be the patient presence of someone who stays without urging, a child's carefree laughter untouched by adult worries, and the feeling of safety that comes from knowing she no longer has to brace herself against life. These things are small, yet enough to soften her heart, enough for her to understand that happiness sometimes only needs to be this simple. When Hoai left, his figure fading along the familiar road, Tieu remained standing for a while longer, as if she was not yet ready to let that moment pass too quickly. The space returned to quiet, yet in her chest, her heart was still beating softly, a slow rhythm, warm and gentle, no longer rushed or restless as before. That feeling spread subtly, like warmth lingering after a light touch, enough for her to realize that she had just lived through something very real. New emotions were growing day by day, not loud, not in a hurry to be named. They existed in the smallest moments, in a waiting that no longer felt heavy, in the fragile yet comfortable feeling of thinking about tomorrow. Everything unfolded very quietly, like young shoots pushing their way up through the soil, slow but persistent. And Tieu understood that, even if she could not yet call it anything definite, those emotions were still real, enough for her heart to keep opening. Little by little, after a long stretch of time, spent only in closing itself off, to protect her own fragility.
Hello mọi người. Cảm ơn mọi người rất là nhiều vì đã xem video của mình nhé. Tạm biệt mọi người, hẹn gặp lại mọi người trong những video sau. Bye bye.